Well, hell, let's just talk about it. I was taken in on a 5150 in 2004. I was emotionally losing my mind. I desperately needed help. I was in my living room drinking. I got drunk in my living room. I was depressed. I was desperate. I was drunk. And prior to all of that, I had turned to the one person I thought had my back. My father. He told me I was crazy and to leave him alone. So yes, I was desperate. I opened my email, and there was an email with one sentence.
Thank you to all of those who have subscribed recently. That has been a huge boost. Don't think that we haven't noticed. We love the comments, we love the engagement, we love the views, and the thing that helps us the most is every time our subscribers go up, we reach more people and we're able to keep producing higher quality videos. So please, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and let's get on to the show. Welcome to Bear It All, the Kintsugi Chronicles, here on the I Am Not Okay channel, where we gather our broken pieces in search of gold. MJ Bear is flying solo today. John Bear and Holly Bear are with you in spirit. MJ, take it away.
Hello, good morning. It's nice to be back with you. The Kintsugi Chronicles. I wanted to continue delving into some of the aspects of what occurred in my life, what I've learned along the way, and I think most importantly, the mistakes I've made along the way. In particular, if there's one thing I can say for certain, I have made every mistake possible when it comes to dealing with these kinds of relationships. And I'm hoping that, if nothing else, you won't be me in the end. Before I get started today on what I want to talk about, I have a few things to touch on. And the first one is the last video I spoke a few weeks ago with regard to the abuse in my family and how my siblings had responded when they learned of our channel. I said I was shocked as a result of their conversations. And I wanted to clarify that I'm not at all shocked by the fact that they're commenting or having a conversation about any of this. My shock has to do with the fact that up until last year, I had convinced myself that the fractures in my family began in 1984. I thought they began the day my mother threw me out, when my parents decided to get a divorce. And because that was the only information I got that day, get out of my house, you're your father's daughter, you're just like your father, I convinced myself that whatever the catalyst was for my mother's conduct that day, for why she chose to do what she did, had to have occurred somewhere in the 2 to 3 year period prior to 1984. And I've spent an inordinate amount of time in the ensuing years trying to identify what it was I could have done wrong that would have resulted in that fracture. Last year I realized, after thinking about that situation all my life here, that I missed one key element and I completely overlooked what it meant. And specifically, I tell this story the same way because it's the way it happened. I had no idea what was going on in my family with regard to my parents. I was on the phone one night with my older sister, and I said, should we have an anniversary party for Mom and Dad? It's their 25th. And Tina said to me, I don't think that's a good idea. Why not? And she said, I think they're getting a divorce. And that was the element that I completely overlooked all these years. The fact that Tina knew my parents were getting a divorce means that she knew what was going on in my family prior to saying anything to me. It also means that Laura and Andrea both knew what was going on with my parents, and no one filled me in. The first I had heard about the divorce was in that phone call with Tina. The next time there was a conversation was when I arrived at my parents' that day. Both of my parents said they wanted to meet with us. My father spoke first. He left, and my mother came in. She didn't even say anything other than get out of my house. Well, I went through that, so. What I'm saying is, when my mother started yelling at me, my sisters all looked away and looked down at the floor. And somehow I decided that they were looking at the floor because in my family, you didn't stick your head above that parapet. When someone was being called on the carpet by one or both of the parents, the last thing the other three want to do is get involved. That's how my family operated. So when I saw my sisters staring down at the floor, I knew that if I was one of the three and someone else had been tossed out on their ear, and I would have done the same thing they did. I would have looked away, I would have looked at the floor, I would have done anything other than make eye contact with whichever sibling was being kicked out. So I gave my sisters a pass because I believed they didn't know what was going on. I deluded myself all these years into believing they were just trying to stay out of the line of fire, when the reality was they already knew what was going on, and I now firmly believe they knew what my mother intended to do. And chose to just let it happen. So my shock wasn't that my sisters were talking. My shock revolves around the fact that I had been estranged from my family all along, even though I was part of the family. Even as a kid, these conversations, these secret, clandestine conversations between my mother and my sisters had been going on all along, and I was excluded. I've said, and I believe it now more than ever, human beings, we're leaky vessels. We essentially expose ourselves as we talk, as we relate to other people. I'm doing it. I'm doing it right now. Everything I'm saying is more or less an indictment on my character, and I'm well aware of that. I'm aware that I'm sometimes talking by the seat of my pants. Other times I forget the entire story, and it may take me a little bit of time to really look at something end to end before the crucial bits of information link up together and I see that pattern of behavior. That's what shocked me, that this had been going on all along, and I had no idea. That's a bitter pill to swallow. It changes everything. Everything that I ever thought about my family, about my place in the family, about all the time that's been lost. Because no one had the integrity to simply be honest. So I wanted to clarify that I'm not shocked that the sisters were talking. I'm shocked that, like I said, it's been going on much longer than I knew, even though I had most of the pieces of that puzzle. It all came together very recently for me. The second thing I want to discuss has to do with today's video. I'm going to be discussing one of the last letters that my father sent to me. But before I get there, I want it to be known that what I have to say with regard to my father is the direct result of my relationship with my father. I have absolutely no doubt there will be plenty of people who will try to shout me down, who will come out of the woodwork to tell me that they knew my dad, that he was a great guy. He was a great friend, he was a great colleague, he was a great cop. I'm sure that my siblings will have plenty to say in that regard, while forgetting their conduct early on in all of this. The reason I'm bringing it up now is simply this. My response to everyone who wants to tell me what a great guy my father is very simply this. I believe you. Of course I believe you. You're the only person who can define your relationship with any other human being. If you tell me you had a great relationship with your father, I consider you fortunate. I'm not going to deny your relationship based on how you're interpreting it. However, your relationship with my father has absolutely no bearing on my relationship with my father. Unless you were his third child, or unless you've been in my life from the moment of birth until now, in my head all along, you can't possibly know who my father was to me. Before you want to shout me down again, allow me to also say, my father has a right, or rather had the right, to define what he believed his relationship with me was. I guarantee you, his opinion and my opinion differ widely at this point. That doesn't mean I'm wrong and he's right. Doesn't mean anyone's wrong. It means we all have unique relationships with every other individual in our lives. No two children have the same parents. No children grow up in the same family. Relationships are dynamic. There are moving parts all around us. If you have 4 children born into one family, the dynamics of the family when the first child is born will vary greatly from when the fourth child is born. The fourth child's experience will be vastly different than the first. And I do believe that in my family, this concept plays a pivotal role in the breakdown of our family. I say that because, well, with respect to my youngest sister, I haven't had any relationship with Andrea to speak of since real relationship, since 1989. There was a period from 1984 when my mother threw me out. All of my sisters ostracized me. After Laura died, Laura's my oldest sister, she passed away at the age of 24 from leukemia. After Laura died, at some point, an uneasy truce appeared to form, where from this distance it looks like and feels like we were going through the motions, trying to pretending that we were a family. And during that period, Andrea and I spent a lot of time together. Her at my house, me at her house, the kids, we got together with the kids. And I can't really say that it was a close relationship, but we were in each other's lives for a period of about 4 years. And yet Andrea, the youngest sister, has a litany of complaints with regard to me. She seems to believe she knows everything about my life, everything about who I am, but she hasn't been a part of any of this for 30-some years at this point. When you're dealing with these relationships, I think it's helpful to really go granular, to look at as many details as you possibly can. That's how I've learned to look at these circumstances, hopefully from a less emotional perspective. I didn't think this would be easy. I just didn't realize that it's so much worse than I remembered. And I think that may be a big reason I didn't want to deal with it. There's another one of my failures. Once I walked away from my family, I convinced myself I couldn't do anything about what happened. I couldn't do anything about the circumstances, and that there was no point in even looking beyond the very last things that happened. I didn't want to deal with it. And if I'm being perfectly truthful here, I still don't want to deal with it. By the same token, the fact that I have this opportunity has made a tremendous difference for me. It's made a tremendous difference for me and my children as individuals, as well as a family. And I can only feel absolutely great about that. For every uncomfortable moment we're having here, we've raised the bar exponentially. We're learning who we are as individuals, and we're learning who we are as a family. We're creating who we are as a family. And as I've said, counseling is great. But it wasn't enough. At least it wasn't enough for me. sitting here with my kids, talking about this, is what's allowed us to move forward, really in leaps and bounds in the past probably 2 months. We had a very rocky start here. If you want to go back and look at some of the earlier videos, it was difficult. At any rate, I'm sure my father was a wonderful whatever to you. Look, I know my dad. He was highly charismatic. Excuse me. He was exceptionally gregarious. He knew what to say, to whom he should say it, and what he should say. He played the game. Pardon me, allergy season. I watched my father all my life. He could glad hand as well as any politician. He could own any room that he walked into. Like I said, he was charismatic, he was powerful. He took over every space, intentionally, I'm sure. And all of those things were his public persona. None of us knows what goes on in somebody else's life. So before you try to shout someone down or before you attempt to discount someone else's experience, bear in mind the only frame of reference they have is their own. The only frame of reference I have is my own. I'm not here to hurt anyone under any circumstances. I can't imagine putting people in this position and then just walking away. I think there's valuable information here in terms of how someone my age, for example, who's been in an abusive family from the start. And the value here is, as time goes on, I hope you'll see that. My experience in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s was so vastly different than your experience today in the 21st century. I hope that you'll see the resources weren't available in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. There was no one to talk to. There was nowhere to go. Nobody discussed what was wrong with their families. That's not what you did. You hid everything. I want you to see that in 60 years, how far we've come, the amount of information that's available regarding narcissistic abuse, dysfunctional families, abuse in general. In the last 15 or 20 years, it's exploded and grown exponentially. More and more people are now able to look at their lives from an objective perspective. Rather than from an emotional perspective. And I hope you'll see that we've made tremendous inroads as far as abuse, dealing with it. And we're still not there. Still not there yet. But we're getting there. And for me, that's an enormous plus. I couldn't have conceived of doing anything like this even 10 years ago, much less 40 years ago. And the final thing I wanted to note today is, I'll be reading one of the last letters that my father sent. I'm going to apologize up front. This is harsh. And yet, it's a fair representation of my life in my family. I'm doing this because I hope people will see that as bad as it gets, we can deal with this. Don't wait all your life like I have. Learn how to treat yourself better than the people who allegedly loved you, treated you. I'm stalling. Yes, I'm stalling. It's painful. This is the last letter that my father, or one of the last letters that my father sent me. I don't believe I'm going to post the entire letter yet. I might at some point. What I'd like to post, however, is the fact that anybody who knew my father, anyone who had seen his handwriting, knew exactly who wrote whatever it was. My father has a very distinctive handwriting, as you can see. I just wanted to show you that the letter is indeed from my father. And now let's begin. Mary Jo, I had been hoping that my letter of January 15th, 2008 might have taught you a valuable lesson in the power of truth, especially when backed up by authenticated verification. I thought verification necessary since you had accused me of many half-truths, non-truths, and plain old ignorance. He is correct, I did say that. That was coupled with your caveat that you don't know me at all, do you, Dad? Sadly, Mary Jo, I do know you, better than I think you know yourself, or at least care to admit, even to yourself. Anyone who tells you they know you better than you know yourself is gaslighting you. No one knows you better than you know yourself. My father hadn't been in my life for 4 or 5 years at this point. And even when he was in my life, my father didn't know me. My relationship with my father was predicated on what he needed and wanted from his relationship with me. So while he tells me he knows me better than I know myself, and he'd been telling me that all my life, it took me almost 50 years to realize he's gaslighting me. Keep that in mind when people want to tell you they know you better than you know yourself. I tried to ignore one of the most heinous and defamatory items you had written. Page 7, lower half of the page. Less than 3 weeks after we lost Tony, a boy Tony went to school with lost his brother. Initially, the belief was an unintended overdose of medication and alcohol. 2 weeks after the young man died, the younger brother was arrested and charged with manslaughter. The postmortem revealed he had died from head injuries sustained in a fight with his younger brother. The reason I sent my father that information is something I have never said out loud. And to my son, John, I don't know if I made the right decision then by not saying anything to you. You were already completely lost because of Tony's death. And I couldn't bring myself to add this burden to everything else that you were going through. The reason I sent my father that information regarding this young man is because in prior letters that my father had sent, he was attempting to convince me that Tony's death was caused by John. He wanted my older son to be held accountable for Tony's death. I sent him the information regarding Tony's classmate in an attempt to say, look, Dad, brothers fight. Since time immemorial, brothers, sisters, siblings, they fight. They throw punches. They get drunk. They do stupid things. And when a tragedy occurs, it isn't always the fault of someone else. Young men who drink and then get into a fight can find themselves in this position. I was attempting to convey to my father that I was aware my sons had been fighting before Tony's death. So again, my father was attempting to hold John accountable for Tony's death, and I refused to take the bait. This unfortunate situation happened 3 weeks after we lost Tony. Further, in your letter, page 7, cited above, you, Mary Jo, defamed not only the older brother and the younger brother, you defamed the whole family with your malicious and contrived lies. You even defamed the memory of your own son in order to tell your vile lies. This was and will always remain despicable, even for you. I have no idea what that's about. However, allow me to complete this. Perhaps you recall my letter to you dated November 6, 2007. Tony died October 8, 2007. This is how my family was operating less than a month after Tony's death. Perhaps you recall my letter to you dated November 6, 2007, which prompted your 32 pages tirade of December 17th, 2007. I had tried to warn you and John about his tirades on his MySpace. You chose to admonish me rather than John for some of his defamatory comments. Allow me to pause for just a moment. I can't tell you how many times I've been threatened by my family in this manner, that everything I've ever said is false, defamatory, deceptive, and I'm a terrible person. And onward. Because I stated such comments might lead to lawsuits and or even arrest, you chose to preach to me about freedom of speech. However, not all speech is free. There's a premise under the law accepted by the courts and to every student of the law. Simply because we have freedom of speech does not give any individual the right to cry, fire, in a crowded theater. Why? Because of the harm, injuries, or even death that might befall other persons. I know that you heard me, at least to some small degree, since many items changed overnight on John's MySpace. You stated you received my letter on December 12th, 2007, and on December 13th, 2007. Changes were made. Despite that, you just had to act out with false bravado in your December 17th, 2007 letter. Allow me to clarify. John wrote a post at the age of 20, he was 26, at the time that Tony died. John was a grown man. He was grieving his brother's death and made the choice to pound it out on a keyboard and post it to MySpace. My family was stalking my children, John and Holly at that time, less than a month after Tony died. Stalking John's MySpace pages brought this particular post to my father's attention. My father sat on it for a while, discussed it with his family. And I did respond to my father about that letter and his tirade about defamation and arrest. And I said, if you have an issue with what John wrote, you're within your rights to pick up a phone, call your grandson, say, hey, John, I just saw this post. Are you okay? Do you want to talk? Is there something I can help you with, John? But that doesn't happen in my family. I also told my father at the time, John is a grown man. John knows damn well when he makes a choice to say or do anything, he's acutely aware of the fact that he's also responsible for the consequences of his words and his actions. John chose to write that post and publish it because he decided he would deal with the consequences, if any. So my father is attempting at this point in time to convince me that I had jurisdiction over my 26-year-old adult son. My father didn't go to his grandson and talk to him. No. We have to triangulate in this family. My father had to come to me to tell me what my son did. I didn't even know the post existed until I got the first letter. If the post changed, and I have to believe it did because my father, my family, they stalk. The changes in the post had nothing to do with me. My father was attempting to tell me that I held a gun to John's head and forced him to write that post in the first place. Then my father got wind of it, threatening me with arrest and a lawsuit. And out of fear, I'm holding the same gun to my son's head and forcing him to change it. Never occurred to these people that John has a mind of his own. Again, this is how my family operates. I said, if you had an issue with what John said, Dad, you talk to John, not me. He never did speak to John. He never contacted his grandson to see if he could help. He just went on his tirade, threatening lawsuits, threatening arrest. So again, triangulation in my family, absolute hallmark of my family. Now, here we go. In all you've said and done and written, you've continued to try and paint Tony as a villain in all that ever transpired between him and John. including Saturday, October 6, 07, despite the fact that John precipitated that fight. There are always witnesses. If one only looks hard enough. I never said anyone was a villain. Not Tony, not John. I've said, and he knows, brothers fight. There was an altercation that Saturday night. Yes, indeed, there was. And they both told me about it. They were both men. It was up to them to deal with the issue together. I'm not certain why my father believed that I was defaming Tony. But I'll get into more later regarding how Tony was actually defamed in death by my family. Take note. There are always witnesses if one only looks hard enough. Take another moment. My father was telling me in that statement, without telling me, I'm being investigated for something. So I decided to call his bluff. Made an appointment with the sitting police chief, a man who knew my father, a man who had worked with my father. My father had recommended this man for the job as chief of police. So I went to see Joe. And the first thing I asked him, are you investigating me, Joe? And he looked at me. For what? Are you investigating my son, Joe? For what? This tells me, after that meeting with the police chief, that my family is looking for evidence of a crime that didn't occur. My father's dead. If he were here, if he had the integrity to look me in the eye, and say this to me, I would ask him, what are you investigating, Dad? You're telling me you've been following my children, following me, and now you're making me the culprit here? No, Dad, that's not going to fly. One of the last things I said to my father, literally one of the last things, was I told him that I'll protect my family from anyone, including him. And that's what I've done all along. It's the reason I went to the police chief. They'd be the only entity that could investigate anything. But here's my father yet again, abusing his prior authority, abusing his prior position, and acting as if he were the police chief investigating a crime. This is standard operating procedure in my abusive family. This is how I lived until I finally walked away in 2007. I wouldn't blame anyone for watching this video and saying, what the hell is wrong with her? Guilty as charged. I don't even know what was wrong with me at that time. When I said, this is worse than I remembered, I wasn't joking. Now that I've let you meditate for half a page or so, you're probably thinking, how would he have known what I was thinking? These are the kinds of statements that the abusive party will make that are meant to be accusatory to you, but that go over your head. And they often did when it was a verbal conversation. When it's in writing, I have the opportunity to go back and revisit these things with a clear head, which is why I'm here now. You're probably thinking, how dare I make such an allegation that you've lied about the younger and older brother. Once again, I give you an offer of proof. The Philadelphia homicide victims, total listing. If you look, you'll see that a firearm was listed as the cause of death for the young man who died in the city of Philadelphia. Not, as I stated, of head injury sustained in a fight with his younger brother, which I had stated resulted in the younger brother's arrest. Further, there was no arrest and/or autopsy in the county in which the young man lived. Bear in mind, Philadelphia homicide victims. If you look, you'll see that a firearm was the cause of death for the young man in the city of Philadelphia. I'm sending you only page 1 of 11 and page 10 of 11. The young man who died was victim number. Now, this debacle created by your vicious lies is the last time I'm ever going to warn you and yours about defamation of character. If you think you're operating on a meager salary now, keep on until you manage to get yourself slapped with a defamation suit and a large monetary award, and you'll truly become intimately acquainted with the true meaning of meager. Please allow me to state for the record, I didn't lie about what transpired with these young men. Had my father simply picked up the telephone, called me and said, "What the hell are you talking about?" I would have told him. The information regarding this situation was given to me directly by the younger brother. The young man came to my home a number of times after his brother's death, not because he was being ostracized by his family, not because his family was treating him poorly, but because he simply needed somewhere to go and be. And that was my home. I spoke to this young man a number of different times. Regarding the loss he felt. There was no defamation. There was no lies. There was no nothing other than trying to communicate with my father. Furthermore, the Philadelphia homicide listing that my father sent me was indeed posted on the Philadelphia Inquirer webpage. It was a semi-interactive map. You would hover over the pin on a map, and a radio box would return with the date of death, manner of death, a name of the victim. When you hovered where the young man died, it did in fact say firearm. It never occurred to my father that the data on a media website could possibly be wrong. He decided that the media is a valid source of unimpeachable evidence in a homicide. The whole time my father was a police officer, and especially when he was a chief, he despised the media. He called the local newspaper the distorter. The media never gets anything right. He had a constant thorn in his side regarding media. And yet here my dad is, using the media as a source of information. I went to the source data on that website and found that the spreadsheet was pointing to the wrong row and cell. I sent my father the public information from criminal court in Philadelphia, the court summary of everything that transpired, including the sentence for this young man. And then my father noted that there was no post-mortem Okay, so he told me that no post-mortem had been conducted in the county where the young man lived because the homicide occurred in Philadelphia, not in the county where the young man lived. Further, there was no arrest in that county. Of course there wasn't. The homicide occurred in Philadelphia. He mentioned Philadelphia multiple times in this letter. Now, at this time, information regarding postmortems wasn't considered public knowledge in this state. It was still being debated in the courts. As a result, it wasn't subjected to FOIA requests. No one would have had authority to contact the coroner and obtain that information, whether it was Philadelphia County or the county where the young man lived. No one, no civilian, would have had access to that information. That can mean only one thing. My father yet again abused his contacts, prior authority, prior position to obtain information that he had no professional reason to possess. The only way he would have gotten that information is by leaning on his previous credentials or requesting an active duty police officer obtain it on his behalf. Either way, the only defamation that occurred here was my father attempting to investigate a young man's death as a civilian, as a former police chief who had no reason to possess that information. Now, all of this is bad enough. My father then takes that information and disseminates it to his family to pick it apart like vultures in order to continue to assassinate my character. Page 11, you stated he's referring to my children when he said, I refuse to allow them to contact my father. He said, I believe they, and I was referring to my children in this. I'm sorry. I said, I believe they've been waiting to hear from you because you dropped out of their lives and you never made any effort to contact them. That's another of my blatant lies. They all ran out of my life, meaning my father, and every other member of their family, because I decreed it. My children were given an ultimatum not to bother with any of my family. I know that firsthand from one of my disciples. I have disciples? I had no idea I have disciples. He said, I know that you wiped out emails that I sent to Holly on numerous occasions. This passage refers to the fact that in 2004, well, hell, let's just talk about it. I was taken in on a 5150 in 2004. I was emotionally losing my mind. I desperately needed help. I was in my living room drinking. I got drunk. In my living room. I opened my email. And there was an email with one sentence. Please kill yourself. I was depressed. I was desperate. I was drunk. And prior to all of that, I had turned to the one person I thought had my back. My father. He told me I was crazy and to leave him alone. So yes, I was desperate. Deeply desperate. I'm not exactly certain how my mother and younger sister got wind of this. But next thing I know, there's a knock at my door. Police officers, my mother, Andrea, and several of her children. Now, I hadn't seen these people in a very long time. They show up at my door with police officers. I was angry. I was furious that my family would do something like that. They didn't call me to find out what was going on. They show up with the police, and I lost my mind. So I was taken in on a 5150. I will be talking about this again. My father showed up at my hearing to try to persuade the judge to hold me for as long as legally possible. They denied his request. And again, I had no contact with my family at that time. After I was released, didn't speak to them again until my son died. As far as me giving my children ultimatums and decreeing who they can and cannot talk to, all of you have lost your damn minds from the start of this. My children have always been a part of your lives. That's a fact I regret. I'll regret that forever. However, even as children, I believed they had a right to be members of their own family, and they were. You know damn well I was excluded from your family. My children weren't. And now you believe that I'm giving my adult children ultimatums that they can't contact their family? No, Dad. That's your MO. You operate from the perspective of if you're not with me, you're against me. I recognize the fact that my children had rights from the moment they were born. Seems you never learned that, Dad. Allow me, if I may. I have no idea how I managed to have this in a folder. 2004. Hi, Poppy. I should tell you this. Mike broke up with me today and my heart is shattered. I'm really upset. But I do think it was for the best. Things haven't been going all that great between us. And I guess we just weren't happy together anymore. But it still hurts a lot, Poppy. It really does. I wish I could come see you again. I want to get away from here. Things just haven't been wonderful lately with me. I've just been really stressed and now I'm upset and in pain and I don't know if I'm overreacting. This morning I saw Mike hugging his ex-girlfriend and I got so upset. Because he told me he was going to talk to his baseball coach. And for some reason I didn't believe him. And it turns out I was right. I don't know, Poppy, my heart just dropped when I saw that. And bit by bit it fell apart. Now it's shattered. Poppy, I love you so much. You're the only guy I can trust. And you're the only one I know who wouldn't shatter my heart. I love you and I miss you. I wish I was there with you. I love you always, Holly. My father responded that day. Hey, Holly. I'm truly sorry to hear about your problems with Mike. However, it sounds as though you've reached a high degree of maturity, especially for your age. First, because you began to recognize the situation on your own. If Mike broke up with you, it was only because he knew he had gotten caught. While your heart is broken and you're upset and will be for a while, you can recognize that it was for the best. Those are giant steps in recovering. Plus the fact your dignity is still intact. Mike, on the other hand, if he's anywhere as near as nice a person as the guy you fell for, will be suffering and agonizing over his loss because he truly is the big loser in this situation. He got caught in the act, not you. So you should have no guilt. Think about it. It's sad to say, however, that that's the hard part of giving our hearts to someone. Before we truly know whether they deserve the honor. On the other hand, it's a large part of growing up today, much more so than in the era in which I grew up. In my time, we really didn't know what love was, or even supposed to be. Today it's everywhere, in books and on television and the movies, everywhere. But you also have to remember that the books and TV movies aren't necessarily real life. And no, I don't think you're overreacting. A physical pain is too real. But the body heals itself, and it's soon forgotten as we achieve normal activity again. The mental pain and anguish, damage to the psyche, the mind, takes longer to heal. We can't always control our thoughts. So the memories keep returning to upset our daily lives. We can't control or speed up the healing of the physical, but we can, with effort and conscious thought, with time, push out the subconscious that trouble our dreams and our daily lives. But it does take effort and self-discipline. I think whether you know it or not, you're already on the road to recovery. Whether you know it or not, there are many, many good and decent young men out there just waiting for their Holly Joe to come along. So be disciplined and patient. Now, I'm certainly glad to hear that you still trust me. And I miss you guys as well. But I'll be back there in just 3 weeks, as I now have less than 3 weeks before I leave to return. I also have a lot of things to get done here prior to leaving and get rested up before I do come back. The drive gets harder each year. I'm really approaching the time where I'm going to have to start flying back and forth. Stay well and think about me. Not Mike. No one else. And I'll soon be there. Love always. Poppy. There's one final email here. This was standard operating procedure for my father. Whenever he had conversations with my children, all of my children, he would contact me to let me know what was going on if he thought there was something I should know. My children always had the right to contact their grandfather independently of me. Same day. My father writes, "Hi, Mary Jo. Got this message from Holly this morning. You can see from her attachment below my response, note the time, she was burning the midnight oil to write to me. I know she's hurt, but it sounds at least as though her head is screwed on right, despite the circumstances. I think she might need an early evening out and some expert mommy conversation to go along with a nice salad and early to bed. Hope this letter helps her. I guess I'm the only male left in her life at this moment. So I wanted to get this out early. She doesn't know you have this. Love, Dad. Exhibit A. I have no disciples. I have no reason to force my children to disconnect from their own family. I never did. The manipulation, the gaslighting, the projection, is how life went for me. If I may finish. I talked once to Holly from Katie's house, Katie, Tina's oldest daughter, and she promised to call me. But, true to Mommy Dearest, that would be me, she never did. Like it or not, Mary Jo, you were the bigger tyrant to your children than Brad ever was. At least with Brad, they showed some manners and attributes sorely lacking during their life under your regime. Again, this is the polar opposite of the context and content of conversations I had with my father over the course of 15 years. My father despised my ex-husband. My ex-husband despised my father. And yet they managed to form an alliance in the end in order to try to further destroy me based on hearsay, based on the definition of an individual they describe and apply to me, an individual I don't recognize. I have to... This, Mary Jo, will be the last time I write and or admonished you, John, or Holly. If you and your children do not cease and desist with your vitriolic writings on the internet, on MySpace, and or written or mailed or documents delivered to any other individual in the family under the cover of darkness, by telephone or any other manner or means, must cease. Any future violations will result in my personal release of the information in your letter to me dated December 17th. I'll release the Philadelphia police homicide listings from the media, which proves to a certainty your writings are false and defamatory to both of their sons and the family as a whole. Regard this not as a threat, but a promise from me. Perhaps you should search your own soul, since you seem to always deem it necessary to question the actions of others. Yes, I do question actions. When they're absolutely false, Dad, I question. I learned from you. Why is it that you never had the decency to attend the funerals of your uncle, Edgar Stanley, June 2008, your Aunt Angela, September 2008, your nephew, Jimmy Kling, November 2008. This is another situation where the gaslighting is in full force. He knows damn well why I didn't attend those funerals. They all know why I didn't attend those funerals. Almost a year prior, I said I was done with that family. I meant it. It was a permanent fracture. My choice. And I proceeded to do nothing more than keep my word. Further, Dad, you know damn well no one contacted me when Gigi died and when Jimmy died. You know it as well as you knew your own name, Dad. The fact that no one contacted me is the evidence that I wasn't welcome. The fact that I didn't go is due to my walking away from this family. You knew damn well I wouldn't be there. As for Uncle Stanley, his death in June 2008, I hadn't been in contact with any of you since the prior year. There was no way in hell I could have known Uncle Stanley died, and furthermore, I wouldn't have gone anyway. This represents you, Dad, attempting to hold my feet to the fire without providing the full context of what actually transpired. I meant it, Dad, when I said half-truths and lies. I meant it then, and I mean it now. Your bravado no longer worked on me at this point. So now you know why I had the decency to stay away. It's exactly what I told you I would do. In order to put your conscience and those of your children at ease, and no further mental breakdowns be suffered, you and your children are hereby banned any and all participation at my funeral. From this date forward, be assured that neither you, Mary Jo, John J., and or Holly Bear will, in the event of my death, be permitted to attend any service, viewing, and or burial of my remains and or ashes, as the case may be. My executor and alternate executor have been empowered in my last will and testament to have you all barred from entry by the police and or private security, spending any amount of money required from my estate to ensure that my edict is carried out. This, my friends, this letter was not written for my benefit. Being banned from his funeral, wasn't for my benefit. As he noted in his letter, there had already been deaths in the family. He knew what I intended to do. This letter was written in order to assuage his ego. My father had I don't even know what you'd call it, a compulsion, an obsession, perhaps, in having the last word in every situation. For some reason or another, robbing him of the last word set him on fire. He was incandescent with rage. And I finally realized with this letter that me saying I was done with all of them robbed him of what he believed was his right, getting the last word in. As a result, he sent this letter for his own purposes, for his own ego. Who in the hell would spend every last dime on security to prevent a schlub like me from attending his funeral? That just doesn't make any sense. And that's because it's nonsensical. His ego was in the driver's seat for all of this. Ironically, when he told me that I must cease and desist, not to contact them, etc., etc., he knew I hadn't been in contact with any of them since the previous November of '07. I had made absolutely no effort. In fact, I went out of my way to disappear from their lives, changed every conceivable contact method I could, increased my own security, went miles out of my way to avoid running into any of these people. So here he is, a year later, sending me a letter that I must cease and desist, that I shouldn't send any letters under the cover of darkness. If I may, I did send a letter December 12th. I said what I wanted to say. I sent it to all of them at the same time, except for the youngest sister. I thought, you know what? I can drive past her house on my way home from work. I'll just drop that off in her mailbox, which is exactly what I did. I left work about 5:30, December, on the East Coast. It gets dark on the East Coast in December, around 4:30, 4:45. So yes, it was evening by the time I rolled up to Andrea's place. He acts like I parked a mile away at 2 a.m., crawled on my belly, slunk up to her door, and dropped a letter in the mailbox. When the reality is, I pulled up in my red Saturn, right in front of the house. She has a picture window here. She has a picture window here. The front door is here. I walk right up the sidewalk. I open the mailbox. I put the letter in. I turn around. I go back to my car and I leave. Now, if that's under the cover of darkness, I don't know what to tell you. Context in these situations matters. It matters to me. Maybe I am a little nuts. For me personally, unbeknownst to any of these people, throughout all of this, The first person I beat up in every situation is me. I'm compelled to understand not only what happened with these people, I'm compelled to understand what I've done in as many situations as possible that would have resulted in this abuse. What have I done that would prompt this kind of hatred toward me? I had to have done something. Well, let's face it, when you're the scapegoat, you're guilty for everything. So I was absolutely certain that something I did or didn't do, said or didn't say, is what caused the situation. When I've made errors in judgment, when I've made mistakes, I own it. When you grow up in a family like this, when you're treated like this by your family, you learn very quickly that the best method is to look at yourself first. I'll be back with another video relatively soon. I want to take the time to go through some of the circumstances which have occurred in my life leading up to this particular end of the story, I suppose. The fact is that this has never been just about me. It's never been about me being a victim, for example. In fact, I've never referred to myself as a victim. This has to do with how these individuals not only treated me, I examine how they treated each other. I examine how my parents treated my sisters, how my parents treated other people. No one is one-dimensional. We're all complex creatures. I wanted to understand if the abuse was specific to me or if the abuse is a knock-on effect from a group of abusive people. I look at myself first. I beat myself up first. And I think we all do in these situations. As I've said before, human beings need to make sense of the things we don't understand. And I hope now you'll see that with a father like this, who was always a cop before he was a father, that my compulsion is a direct result of being a member of this family. I do hope you'll come back and help me along the way here. Talk about the things I've never spoken of in my life. I appreciate your interest, and I absolutely look forward to speaking to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to our show. If you're interested in how we've gotten this far, I've put together a small guide that has a 3-step process at no cost. You can get that at www.decipher.com. www.iamnotok.com/truth. www.iamnotok.com/TRUTH. Thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you on the inside. Be well.